Thank you for the comments that you guys made from the last one. It's greatly appreciated. I took a week, got busy with work and stuff, so I wanted to also have a good topic to talk about. And the way I have recently been getting topics to talk about is really from my journaling. And sometimes not everything I journal about is things that I either feel comfortable with sharing or feel like really would qualify as good video topic. I'm hoping as I continue to do this, I'll learn, what whoever is watching likes, and maybe you guys can, anybody that watches this can leave a comment and say, hey, I like this for this reason, or I didn't for, this reason. That would be helpful as I learn. And obviously this isn't for anyone really but myself, but if anybody watching takes value from this, then that's amazing. And also a great goal that maybe at some point I wish to really focus on having and building on. And I've been thinking a lot lately about how continuing to do this, maybe becoming more consistent with these videos, it'd be really cool to have a community or some sort of little group. I guess community is the right way to put it, that, enjoys the videos, and we just can go over different topics in these videos that you guys would like to see. I guess maybe my perspective, if that's something that anyone would be interested in. I do think that I have a pretty good outlook on things, not to be too self gratuitous, but I do appreciate that about myself. And I think that that's where in life I found balance. But I digress. The main point of this video is to go over something that I really realized how close it was to who I am in a lot of ways when it comes to relationships. And what I mean by that is the need that I found myself going towards controlling in terms of wanting things to go a certain way in a relationship, in platonic or romantic, always kind of wanting to make sure things went my way. There's obviously a healthy version of that and a not healthy version of that. And I meditated on the difference between leading and controlling, and realizing how, for the longest time, I considered them intertwined and kind of considered them one and the same. Whereas that's not the case. Leading and controlling are different things, and there are pros and cons to each of them. I think obviously leading lends itself to being more good, more healthy, in the sense that I had always clouded what my version of leading was due to having them combined. And it's a aspect of my ego trying to control outcomes of things or people that are external. And in Buddhism, they say that attachment is the root of all suffering, right? And that is a form of attachment that I have learned that I have to let go of, which is my attachment to controlling things outside of out that are external. So how a person views me, how a situation goes, how much fun this other person has, or how much, all things like that, where it's not something that you can really control. You can try, and I definitely did. And in some ways, I could go back in the past and tell you different ways where I was successful, sort of, so to speak. But that was not, that's manipulating. Like, that's manipulating someone to do things the way you want them to do things or to view things the way you want them to view things. And I don't want to have that be the way that I navigate life. And after meditating on this for quite some time, a few days of really decompartmentalizing and feeling my feelings surrounding this need, this ego searching for control in outcomes, I realized Buddhism is 100% correct in that I suffer every time that I try to seek external validation, which I've already talked about before, and seek external control, control over others. In that, I recognize that actually solving this is noticing when I am trying to control and when I attempt to do that, and also acknowledging the pros in control. And I could probably go on and on about some of the different ways it's a pro, but really what those pros are just what, in my mind, leading is. And we could talk about leading in the sense of more so akin to a romantic relationship, where, in my opinion, when it's a, straight, traditional, whatever relationship between a man and a woman, this is not to speak of, between a guy and another guy or a woman and a woman, so on and so forth, all the other different ways that, relationships can appear. That's not for me to speak on. I'm not knowledgeable on that, but I'm knowledgeable enough on straight relationships that I can tell you my opinion on them, in the sense of, I believe that there are, at a base level, there are ways in which the man in a relationship should be leading the relationship and protecting the woman's peace and her inner child, and helping her become more connected to her divine feminine, just as there are ways in which the woman should lead in helping the man connect to his divine masculine. And this is where I probably lose some people. That's okay though. This is just my opinion. And please, in the comments, if you disagree, please, tell me why. I'd love to open a dialogue about all of this. This topic interests me greatly, and I'm not super knowledgeable on the divine masculine, the divine feminine, things like that. However, I do find it super interesting. So, all that to say, I think, obviously, since I'm a man, I am more focused on the way a man can lead in a healthy masculine manner in a relationship, because I think that that's really important in the success of a relationship. And now, having had enough relationships that have ended, I feel as though I've learned enough to say this with confidence, that when part of this can be viewed differently, and every relationship is different, so I'm generalizing, but when a man stops being able to meet a woman with her emotions, her safety, and her need for different avenues of acknowledgement, that's partially a way the end of a relationship begins. And that being said, what does it look like, in my opinion, to meet a woman through leading and actually provide that sort of, you could call it a safe space for them? And in my opinion, it's when we as men stop trying to defend our reasons for doing things and start coming across as curious more than defensive. And this is natural. Both people do it, but everybody does it. Everybody goes a lot of the times to defending the reason they did something, or, you know, really starting attacking the points that the other party is bringing up, platonic and romantic, right? And I noticed in my life, I would control conversations. I would control the way I was viewed by my exes to avoid discomfort and seeking safety. Because in my mind, due to my childhood, the way that I was safe was if I could control, right? As we discussed earlier, though, there's no way to really do that, but I thought there was. The only way I could create safety was controlling and, you know, the narrative of how this person viewed me, and really was driven by the ego notion of how people viewed me. I think to some degree that it's normal. However, I do think that the degree as to which I was going towards attempting to control how people viewed me, especially in a romantic relationship, it was completely unhealthy. And that comes to my point of how laziness in my fear of not wanting discomfort, seeking comfort, seeking complacency, because for the longest time I was within a state of, fight, flight, or freeze, whatever you would like to call it, that state that we get in childhood if we have a not great childhood. And forgive me, that's the best way I could put that. I therefore would do anything in my power, so to speak, to be viewed a certain way so that could avoid having to do hard things down the line. But what that turns into is just a kicking the can down the road, right? You're just pushing that notion aside for the time being, and you're beating around the bush, right? I did that. I did that. And creating easy, manageable outcomes was really just my fear of the unknown, the unfamiliar, or in some ways, my fear of what I knew happens when hard conversations, hard things occur relating to my childhood, my past, and other, friendships and things. I knew what that was like. And so with other people, I didn't want to ever broach that area because that was scary. And that reminded me of what it's like to not be safe. And your brain, your ego, especially mine, is always trying to prevent you from being in danger, whether it's physical, mental, etc., emotional. And that work, which now I'm craving to do with others, to open up and be vulnerable with others, that work that would need to take place by sharing my real opinion on matters was something that, like, my laziness, my ego would not allow. And this was just, like I've kind of already mentioned and noted, is this was my subconscious recreating my childhood in an attempt to reaching a different outcome to what my childhood provided. Leading is something that I've always been reluctant to do because I was always worried about the reactions of others and what if I made the wrong decision, whatever it was, romantic, platonic, otherwise. And now looking back throughout my life, I realize that I actually have a proclivity to lead, and I am fairly good at it in a lot of ways. The pros of leading without fear of how others are going to view your decisions is something that I'm still working towards. However, now that I understand what that really means to me, I don't have that driving my waking moment. And realizing that when I stay present, I am a good leader. I can make the best decision given circumstances. And it makes me excited when working and being given decisions to make. Or, for example, my boss was out for the week a few weeks ago, and it was just me and my two coworkers. For some context, I am a project coordinator. They are assistant project managers, and my boss is a project manager. I'm the lowest on the totem pole, so to speak, right? However, in terms of how long I've been at the company, I've been there longer than my two assistant project managers. So I'm more knowledgeable on company operations and things, right? And so it was very much so hey, what do you think? And what is your view on this, and how do you want to go about doing these things and really making decisions, it's some important decisions for projects. And it felt crazy to feel that confidence in my decisions. It's a funny feeling when you finally really trust yourself to not try to worry how a decision or how you're handling yourself in a certain light is being viewed. And the week went extremely well. I say all this to point out that while that's the case, I still deal with that feeling of wanting to control how others view me. And that's something I'm working on. And I found it best for myself personally is when I stay in the present moment and I really see what is happening in front of me, and I only focus on the facts of a situation. That takes me out of my own head and puts me in the mindset of what is actually happening and what is the goal I'm trying to reach. In life, I've always been somebody that got along with everyone, and it has always been very hard for me to find people that I actually don't get along with in different ways. And I'm looking back now and realizing that the reason for that is because I wasn't being me. Not to say that I'm not cool to get along with or anything. I think I'm a cool person, but I definitely sacrificed my own self in order to keep relationships at a certain level. And it's very weird if you've always had a mask up and you've always thought deep down that the real you isn't something that people will tolerate or find interesting or cool or whatever, all these different things, right? And you have this deep level of shame like I did. When you finally start dropping the mask and see that everybody's focused on themselves just as much as you are on yourself, the confidence boost it's incredible. I feel so much more confident in who I am as a person, and it only compounds. And in this journey, with that being said, there will be ebbs and flows. However, it's only ebbing and flowing up. And that's what's so great about recognizing all these different things that I've mentioned in this video. I want to go back a little bit and go a little more maybe in depth or just touch upon it more about leading versus controlling. And note that I think in a romantic relationship, in order to truly lead as a man, you have to understand that there are double standards for both men and women. Goes both ways, takes two to tango, that they're unfair. With that being said, you have to take out that ego of wanting to explain yourself or wanting to win or wanting to,
be deemed a certain way. And that this is something that I wish I had learned when I was younger, right? These are things, but as you age, I think, you listen to me, I'm talking like I'm 70, but the point being, I think it's so imperative that you come to your partner, your girlfriend, your spouse, your wife, your serious relationship with really trying to just understand how this person wants to be seen. And that's how I think you provide yourself with the ability to lead. And they are able to kind of surrender themselves into their divine feminine. They feel safe. Providing that safety through curiosity and how they are wanting to be loved and wanting to be seen is, dude, I think, in my opinion, that's a hack, man. That's like up, down, A, B, left, right, whatever the code is. You'll find it very hard for a relationship to go poorly unless you guys are just obviously not meant to be and not compatible, and all those other reasons why that could be there. You'll find it very hard that a relationship will fail. There are other aspects, of course, but I think that is a cornerstone to leading and being in a healthy masculine. And it's important that when you have this curiosity, in my opinion, that the leading, you should have the goal in mind with curiosity still. You should have the goal in mind of only ever wanting to be on the same team as your partner. In that sense, I think this could go beyond just a male-female, relationship. But I think that it's your job as a man to be able to, when your girlfriend is angry with you or trying to portray the emotions they're having about something, it's important to listen. But I think it's also important that you are asking questions that lend themselves to getting down to the root, the core, as to what does she really need in this moment. And sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder, right? And the way I'm relaying it this way is for my guys, because I know for a lot of men, we immediately want to solve problems. And when our girlfriends' wives come to us and say they've had a bad day, we want to go, oh, well, if you did this, then maybe you want to have that issue anymore, something like that, right? And you've probably heard this time and time again, but that's not what they want. They want an ear. They just want somebody to listen to them in a lot of ways. What I find extremely helpful in situations like that is leading them in the sense of saying, oh, how did that feel? Like asking questions. That goes back to being genuinely curious about their emotional state, how they're feeling, how they're perceiving things, because that's important, because they're important, right? And I think you'll find that when you ask these questions, naturally, they're able to solve their issues if they're looking for a solid answer. Like I said, sometimes they're just looking for an ear. You'll find that they solve the issues for themselves. When you're just asking questions, when you're just saying, oh, that's interesting. Why do you think she said that or he said that? Or that sounds a little robotic, so obviously change it depending on the circumstance and it'll have to come across more natural, not like a therapist. But if you're able to come at it with curiosity, that is how you lead your spouse, in my opinion, to trusting you. And then they trust you're going to understand them and be able to make decisions for them. And you're going to feel confident in that, because by asking all these questions, you've gotten a bunch of information and understand your person on such a level that you trust yourself and have that confidence. Also, it's good to be said that there are sometimes when both sides, we play games, and
it can be very hard to navigate relationships in general, but especially so, right? When it feels like the other person is just not really being truthful, playing games, not being themselves. And I think that having boundaries with that person and not betraying yourself, like I know I've done and do, in an attempt to please and placate that person when they're not even being their true selves, is way more important than anything else. Keep holding on to who you are as a person is like, that's up there, right? That's number one. You've got to, without that, you're not a person. You're a different person. You're not yourself, and you're only you. And so, what I mean by that, to make it more succinct, is there are going to be times where your person is coming at you or situation, etc., with a lot of emotion. And that being said, there's nothing wrong with that. They're just a human being in their right to feel however way they're feeling. There's nothing wrong with feelings, but it's your job to recognize when that is happening. And I realize this isn't much more succinct than what I was just saying. However, it's more so expounding on it. If you can essentially be a container, for lack of a better way to put it, if you can be a container to that person's emotions, let's put it this way: you're the dam wall, right? Say there's a lake and we get torrential downpours. Now the lake is, you're getting maybe some waves, some choppy water. The choppy water is the range, the emotions that are coming at you from your partner. And if you're able to contain that, hold yourself, who you are as a person, while also providing them a safe space to change and have these emotions and not judge and not put your issues and your things, and just listen and come at it with curiosity, like I said, that's the key right there. They're going to feel extremely safe. And containing that water, but staying the dam still, in my mind, that is a great way to really hold a person in a safe, friendly, non-egotistical way. You're just trying to hold the lake together and help the lake get through this choppy time. The dam wall doesn't have any other objective but that, right? That's all the dam wants to do, is be this safe wall to contain the choppy water. Hopefully, whoever's watched this understands what I was saying and maybe took some importance from it and some wisdom and some different views. Maybe you're like, dude, you're crazy, or you're missing a whole point of it all, and that's fair. Please comment. Please let me know what I missed. Please let me know what I did bad, what I did good on. I'm learning and trying to get better and curious. Like I said, I am trying to, practice what I preach. So, yeah, thank you guys for watching. And I'm working on getting more videos out. I plan to hopefully make this weekly and really stick by that. So thanks for watching.